pleasure of speaking to a few days ago. He works in, he's the head actually of emerging payments at TD Bank, which is a very forward-thinking bank. It's a large bank, but it's also one that's trying to move quickly. He manages the development and execution for digital payment products. Now, in light of what we just heard from Patrick, we understand that trust is important. You have to know that your transactions are safe and secure, but they can't make them too complicated. So trust and digital payments are shaping trust in banking. That's a nice entree into the things that Christopher will be talking about. So Chris, drum roll, and I'll kick it over to you.
Just pulling my screen up one moment. Can you hear me okay? I have a 1-year-old and a dog, so I apologize for any background noise.
I can hear you fine, thank you.
Okay, excellent. All right, here we go then. So thank you, David, for the intro. Just to give you guys a little sense of my role. So I do work for TD Bank, but I work for the U.S. Consumer Division. So TD has what they call AMCB, America's Most Convenient Bank. So I work on the consumer deposits team, and I lead emerging payments within the overarching digital payments group. So what that means is, I oversee everything from mobile wallets, P2P, money movement, bill pay, all the way to some of our alerting capabilities. So what I'm going to be talking about today is sort of the perspective on the role of digital payments before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and sort of where do we go from here, and what the overarching impact is in terms of trust. But I thought, before we dive into some of the feedback, there we go, we would start with a quick anecdote. And sorry, a little bit of a slow start here, but I was having some technical difficulties. So quick anecdote. So in the early days of the pandemic, before we were, where we are today, we were still working our way through Tiger King, stocking up on toilet paper. It seemed like there was a lot of anxiety around money movement and security. And so working in the payment space, I always take it upon myself to educate my friends, educate my family about some of the new emerging technologies. But I was out with my father, and he pulls this thing out of his pocket. And I looked at it and said, what is that? I thought it was, I don't know, a sticker or maybe like a sheath that his debit card had come in. But it was actually an RFID blocker. And so apparently one of my parents' friends knew someone who knew someone who knew someone who had traveled abroad, and they had actually lost some of their information because of a skimmer. And so I swallowed my pride, and I said, Dad, why didn't you ask me first before you, purchased, a lifetime supply from Costco? But, tokenization aside, unless he's breaching social distancing norms, I question the efficacy of some of these things that we've seen in the marketplace. I think the jury's still out. But ultimately, I think what that experience sort of taught me was that even my father, right, the father of someone who works in the industry, if he's anxious and unaware about the technology, it's clear that, while some of this stuff may reduce the actual physical exposure to the virus, there's this latent demand for sort of a trusted advisor to help close these gaps across the customer journey. So before we dive into some of the nuances, right, that we encountered here at TD, it's important to sort of unpack the effect of COVID, right? And here at TD, we ran this Money Matters survey. The most recent results are from late June. So I think, they're fairly relevant, but we realized that a lot of the overarching digital payments adoption was confounded by this sort of underlying heterogeneity. And I tried to distill some of the feedback into 3 different pieces because, its adoption was very fragmented. The first piece that we looked at was that the gap in mobile usage was much, much wider than we had expected between Gen Z and boomers. Like almost all of Gen Z had adopted, mobile deposit and mobile wallets. and a very, very small portion of boomers had adopted both of those technologies. Second, almost all millennials were already using digital payments, particularly on the P2P side before the pandemic. And after the pandemic, they plan to continue to use those services. So there really wasn't much of a change, with the exception of the fact that they were, purchasing a lot of non-durable goods in the e-commerce space. But lastly, one of the things that we took away was that one of the larger concerns was obviously security, but what I guess was puzzling to me is that almost 40% of the customers, told us, hey, we're going to go back to our traditional cash and card once the quarantine is over. And so, working in the payment space, knowing how easy it is and how frictionless some of these new payment capabilities are, I was real surprised at that feedback. So, and try to dig a little bit deeper, see if there were some additional questions we could look at to try to uncover what might be driving some of that sentiment. So next slide. So I couldn't find any data that corroborated that 40% and sort of the ambivalence around cashless, but I did uncover some thematic feedback from a question that we had asked about trust, but the numbers really didn't add up. So for example, overall, right, close to 80% of the respondents reported that close to 90% of respondents claimed that the trust they had in their bank went up or remained the same. And I think that was to be expected, but only 1% of customers were concerned about security, 1% were concerned about digital access, and 2% were concerned about customer service. So, I think that's no surprise. Customer service is one of the biggest points or reasons that, a lot of customers bank with us. So, I think there's a lot of emphasis today on...
That's an interesting point, though, because it suggests that the move to digital that has been accelerated by COVID, people don't really associate that with an increased security risk. They just say, we're going to digital. The security risk it inheres in the bank itself, I guess, in the customer's perspective, rather than in the method with which they're transacting.
Yeah, no, it is really interesting. And I think in addition to the security, I think a lot of folks, we've seen a lot of adoption with respect to some fintechs, and obviously our focus is on creating a lot of interoperability, and everybody keeps talking about UI and having the sleek interface, but I think at the end of the day, the security is really what a lot of customers are more concerned about, and knowing that they can go to a physical store or call in if they have a problem. So I think that's a pretty key point.
Hey, one question just came up I thought was interesting. I don't know if this was in the measurements that you did or the research you did, but somebody had asked, has there been any change in interest related to cryptocurrency due to COVID? Now, that may not have been part of what you surveyed people on, but if you have any thoughts on that, that was a question.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the views, expressing here today are mine and not of the bank, but I would say,
I'm not going to hold you to it.
All right. Thanks, David. So, I would say, personally, I think that, blockchain technology is very interesting. I'm not quite sure that, that we're there. One of the things that I've learned in working in, retail banking is that it's very hard to change behavior, both internally and externally. So I think that the, crypto may be a little bit further along in the journey. If we look at Square's Cash App, there's been a lot of adoption. A lot of folks point to the fact that, you're able to interact and purchase cryptocurrency through that type of platform. So, it's obvious that there is some demand, but at the moment, I don't think that, TD is looking into that space very clearly. So
Thank you.
I think, as we look to the future, one of the things that I think could come to fruition as we look at, the maturation of international remittance, that's an area that I could see that technology fitting, very nicely in. So, any more questions, Dave?
No, carry on. I'll butt in if there are. So carry on.
Okay, cool. So the only conclusion that I could sort of realistically draw from some of the feedback is that this sort of small contingent, right? The 2% that were worried about customer service, the 1% about security, the 1% about access to digital, they were sort of having this exponential impact on overall customers' sentiment. And that's why, we had received that feedback about, 40% of folks looking to move back because, if we connect the dots from the earlier anecdote, right? My parents' friends of friends of friends, they were the folks that were part of that 4% contingent. So, so we synthesized the feedback from a lot of these RFID sleeve influencers and took a holistic approach to try and sort of future-proof digital adoption across customer segments. And I think it was interesting. I hopped on at the end of the last presentation, and it seemed like there was some talk about simplification and looking at the fundamentals. And I think one of my challenges is that digital payments can be so complex, both explaining internally and externally, that it's really, the pandemic has taught us it's sort of a return to the basics and making sure that, hey, across the customer journey for all different types of customers, that we're providing exactly sort of what they need. So, what do we do here in the U.S. consumer segment? So the first thing we did was, we really enhanced self-service, right? So we leveraged some internal and external technologies to create more, I would say, in-app messaging, interstitials. We also looked at increasing limits, particularly for mobile deposit. Second, we enriched the educational content that we provide. We created, like a digital academy with a focus on, educating customers, not only about interoperability and how to enroll in these services, but also about data and data aggregation, because I think customers are unaware of, hey, they look at something, or they enroll in a fintech app and it has our logo on it, but it might not be on one of our platforms. So I think it's very unclear with all this rapid adoption, what data is being shared. So it's a really key point. And then lastly, we sort of fine-tuned our payments platform. We didn't do anything groundbreaking, right? No crazy technology, but right, we balanced that interoperability with risk, and we really, really focused on real-time payments and P2P. So, it's only been a few months since some of the states in our footprint began reopening, but I'm delighted to report that there's no sign of slowing down. I don't think there's, and I don't think that we're going to see a 40% shift back to physical card. And then, I have here on the bottom of the slide, putting my business school hat on, right? I think there's a lot of these cliche, hindsight is 2020 lessons that we can learn. But I really thought that this Kodak example was really prescient because, it's all about digital adoption. And, if you look at Kodak, they created the digital camera. They purchased or acquired a photo sharing site, but they still, were unsuccessful, right? So, what was it that they did wrong, right? And, I think banks are trying to really, focus in on how we can make digital adoption work. And, from my perspective, the reason why Kodak sort of went wrong is because they didn't really understand where their customers wanted to interact and what they actually wanted to do with photos. They had this sort of like razor blade business model where, they were really, wedded to that, and they couldn't, and customers they thought customers wanted to print out their photos. Well, actually customers wanted electronic photos. They wanted to share photos to all their friends. And so Facebook and Instagram became sort of the next big thing in terms of like, photos and sharing. So, I think, if we look back to some of the things that we did, some of those actions were sort of influenced by some things we've seen throughout history. But, I think if we can take anything away from the pandemic, it's that COVID has really upped the table stakes for digital payments. And, now more than ever, we sort of need to strike this balance between the fundamentals, sort of the whiz-bang innovation, because trust is sort of prevailing as this new social currency. So I know that was pretty short, but hopefully, valuable. Any other questions, David?
Yeah, I've got a couple of them actually. So, one, which of the service offerings are creating more of a prioritized competitive advantage for TD, given that Zelle, et cetera, are market-wide? So I guess what they're saying is, Zelle cuts across all the different banks. So what is the competitive advantage for putting some of these things out?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll be honest, one of the things, well, I'm in the product management space. I'm very much, a business owner, and so I'm always focused on the value that these types of services provide. So I think we've really taken a hard look at, what is the value of P2P? And on the Zelle side, we were actually one of the first movers to launch Zelle. So it's actually been around for a number of years. And personally, I think that the fact that we launched before a lot of these smaller FIs and credit unions, we've really been able to create this sort of user base that have come to appreciate the service. And the average number of transactions that we're seeing across the Zelle platform is competing with Venmo and Square Cash, and it just keeps going up. And so I think we have this loyal user base that we've sort of created, and coupled with the customer service model, it's been very fruitful.
And I would imagine that adding those things on and being early and adding them on just provides, I don't know if you're going to call it a moat, but against some of the other providers that may come in as single vertical that say, how we just do P2P transfer. There's another question related to that idea, which is, I mean, the space of neobank or whatever is a very active space right now. One is, how do you cope with the increasing number of digital payment disruptors, embedded banking solutions in parens, which need integration with core banking activities? Customers can be driven away due to lack of integration with these online shopping sites, and using them increasingly, and not all of them are well integrated in certain countries. So I think I can derive from that you have a lot of solutions popped up. You have users in different geographic areas, and there's an integration challenge. So the question touches many areas, but we'd love your comments.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like a pretty global audience. So, I'm not sure how familiar folks are with the U.S. Financial banking space, but it's super fragmented. And so compared to Europe or even Canada, for that matter, right? There are so many, different FIs. So I think our geographic area has been slow to enter, this open banking API environment. And, I don't want to, speak on behalf of the bank, but, I would say from my perspective, in terms of integration and capabilities, it's difficult to be all things to all people, right? And, you really have to, again, focus on your customers and the folks that you're serving. So, for example, we have a very large physical retail network, a distribution model, and I think that's one of our competitive advantages. So, I think you have to look at, well, where are your strengths and where do you need to grow? Digital is becoming table stakes. So I think, we are moving swiftly to close a lot of those gaps. So, as I look at mobile wallets and, that strategy, if you will, that's something that, we're taking a hard look at, as we think about, how we can, accelerate, the customer journey as they continue to grow purchases in the e-commerce channel.
And related to that, and I think this will probably be it, depending on how long it takes to answer the question. This goes back to Zelle, and what we spoke about earlier was the question is, so the value proposition is not just keeping your customer base using TD Bank branded platform, but also moving transactions into the digital age and away from brick and mortar. So is there a sense that some of the strategy you're doing is to move away from brick and mortar, or that brick and mortar will be there for whoever wants it as long as they need it, or something like that? So I added the last bit on. The question ended at moving them away from brick and mortar.
Yeah, so no, it's an interesting question. I think our approach to P2P has not really been to steer customers in a particular direction. We've wanted to create convenience, right? That's our model. So we want customers, right? We've enabled real-time payments. We want customers to be able to move their money, wherever they want to. But I think, that being said, even if, going back to the example about my parents, they're using P2P, but they're using it for much different use cases, right? They're using it to, maybe pay their church offering, right? Whereas some folks are using it, my wife is using it for tips for her, for her hairdresser. So looking at the retail piece, the brick and mortar piece that you'd sort of tacked on there, I would say, the model that we offer, it has to be holistic. It has to cater to all different types of customer segments. And I think it's important, to have that physical distribution model, because it's just like cash. Like, even though folks might not be using cash anymore, they want to know it's there if they have to use it. And so I don't think you can just completely, close down all these branches, right? It's customers want to know that if, hey, there's a problem, I can drive down the street and talk to these people. And so I think that's why the physical space is still going to be around for a while.
Well, that is perfect. That's a great summary. That's a great answer to the question. And we're just on time to move on to the final presentation of the day. As I've been saying throughout this morning, is I thank you very, very much for making the time. This is great. We're covering a lot of ground, and all the presentations will be available for those who are interested. So just reach out to the organized intelligence. And I said there's lots and lots to talk about. We have limited time, so we're keeping these to 20-minute presentations, but I hope they've spurred some questions and suggested some particular directions to go. And I appreciate your contribution to that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
All right, guys.